I'm Annalisa Miller, Director of Development and Regional Engagement at Project Equity. Thank you so much for joining us for Rebuilding with Resiliency and Equity through Employee Ownership. The evidence is clear and the time is now. Project Equity is a national nonprofit that fosters economic resiliency with frontline workers and workers of color through employee ownership. Our main strategy is to transition small, strong businesses with low income and diverse workforces to employee ownership, resulting in quality jobs, empowered workers, and strong local economies. And our core leverage point for facilitating these transitions is harnessing the silver tsunami of retiring baby boomer business owners, most of whom lack succession plans and whose businesses would otherwise close upon their retirement. So what we do is we work with these business owners and transition ownership to their employees. And in doing so, we preserve long-term local ownership of vital community businesses. And we also create tremendous wealth building potential for the next generation of diverse business owners. This is particularly important right now as COVID-19 is accelerating the pace of small business closures, and as the movement for Black lives calls upon all of us to address systemic racism in all areas of our society, including the racial wealth gap. So what is employee ownership? It is a high impact but little known business structure in which a broad base of employees owns the business where they work. So a lot of us are familiar with stock options. That's the most common form of employee ownership today, but it's usually available only to management. In contrast, broad-based employee ownership gives all employees who meet basic criteria the opportunity to become employee owners and reap the benefits of employee ownership. So there are three main forms of broad-based employee ownership: employee stock ownership plans, otherwise known as ESOPs, worker cooperatives, and employee ownership trusts, which are less common and newer to the US. Today, you'll hear us discuss ESOPs and worker cooperatives. They are different in structure from each other, but they both offer employee owners tremendous benefits in terms of quality jobs and asset building. So we have a powerful and engaging agenda for today. I will briefly introduce our speakers. Our Project Equity's co-founder, Hilary Abel, will present the evidence-based case for employee ownership and why it's a powerful tool for addressing working poverty and income and wealth inequality. Ren Bogirin, an employee owner with A Slice of New York, will share his story. We'll have an engaging conversation with leaders from philanthropy and local government who have invested in employee ownership. They'll share why they've invested in and what they've seen over the years in terms of progress in the movement. And then we'll have some time at the end for questions and answers. So if you have any questions, we encourage you to put them in the chat, and we'll pick a few at the end to address to our speakers. So our conversation that we'll have later on in the webinar will feature Diane Ives from the Candida Fund as our moderator, Jean Wardford from the Kellogg Foundation, Jordan Klein from the City of Berkeley, and Christina Correa from City Community Investing and Development. So the first part of the webinar, Hilary Abel is going to present the case for employee ownership, Project Equity's recent white paper that goes through the over hundreds of studies that document the major benefits of employee ownership for businesses, workers, and communities. Hilary will share some facts and figures and charts from the white paper that show the benefits on business growth and profitability, on worker well-being and asset building and wages, and benefits to the community. And she'll also share some stories of employee-owned companies. So I'm going to turn it over to Hilary now, who's going to tell you, share a little bit about the story of Recology.
Provides waste management, or as they call it, resource recovery services. They're one of the greenest waste management companies you can find. All up and down the West Coast, they have nearly 4,000 employees and are 100% employee-owned. One of the beautiful things that they have done for their community was the Recology Recovers policy that they implemented early in the COVID-19 pandemic. So for several months, they guaranteed full pay and benefits to all of their employees, even if they didn't have enough work for everybody. That's just one way in which employee-owned companies support their communities. I also want to tell you about Mandela Grocery Cooperative in West Oakland, which is a food desert. They've been around for about 12 years now. They're a Black-owned co-op in the community of West Oakland, which is a historic Black community. that suffers from a lot of challenges, including lack of access to fresh food. This is their general manager, Andrea Talley, at the farmers market, talking with one of the Black farmers from whom they purchase. They do a lot of local purchasing. So in addition to being open as an essential business and adapting for their workers and the community's safety, they created a new program to provide, to help elders in the community do their shopping without having to come into the store. So they created online ordering for the first time, and knowing that a lot of elders would be ready to do ordering online, they also created an outreach program where volunteers were calling elderly people in their community, taking their orders, and then bringing it to the store and getting that food delivered to them. Their sales have increased 35%, so we're hoping that the company will come through stronger than ever. That is the most studied way that employee ownership benefits society, is through creating stronger locally owned businesses. The Democracy at Work Institute did an analysis a couple of years ago that compared the profit margins in worker cooperatives in several industries to those of other companies in their same industries. And the profit margin of those cooperatives was almost 9% higher than their peers. There have been many studies in the ESOP sector on this issue. One by the National Center for Employee Ownership showed that sales and employment grew 2% faster each year after the company instituted an ESOP than before. There's also ample evidence that employee-owned companies provide better wages. One of the studies that I was excited to find, very recent one, was the first large-scale national study of worker cooperatives in the United States. And it was done by the Democracy at Work Institute and the University of Wisconsin at Madison. And one of the exciting data points was that they found that employees in these cooperatives were earning $2 more per hour than they had in their previous jobs. Similar data has come from large studies of ESOP companies. One found that the ESOP employees were earning 53% more than employees in other companies. Truly, truly dramatic. And in my own work prior to co-founding Project Equity in 2014, I had worked with home cleaning cooperatives in the San Francisco Bay Area. We did very rigorous impact measurement and actually found that the family incomes of the women in these companies were increasing by 40 to 80%. So their individual incomes were doubling and tripling, but the family incomes were growing dramatically as well, which is really the most powerful measure of economic stability and security. We've also found that employee ownership has wonderful wealth building benefits. We've referenced the racial wealth gap, and one of the groundbreaking studies done in recent years focused on that. It's called Building the Assets of Low and Moderate Income Workers and Their Families, the Role of Employee Ownership. It was done by the Rutgers Institute for the Study of Employee Ownership and Profit Sharing and funded by the Kellogg Foundation. And you'll hear from Jean, who had a lot to do with that shortly. The findings were very exciting, and this chart in the case for employee ownership, I took data from that study and compiled it in this format to show the breakdown across genders and races of the savings, not only in the ESOP retirement plan. So ESOPs are fundamentally retirement plans, and those stock, the value of that stock doesn't get paid out until the person retires. But there are other things like profit sharing and other benefits during their time in the company. It's also true that ESOP companies are much more likely to provide 401ks than other companies. So the combined retirement savings, I'm just going to give you the example of men of color in this study, were dramatically more. For Black men, they were $232,000. For Latino men, $270,000. And this compares to the paltry, almost non-existent, less than $1,000 for the median Black or Latino man worker in the United States. I want to speak now a little bit to the community benefits of employee ownership, which are too many to name, but you can read about them in the paper. You can talk with any of us on the call or any of the other wonderful organizations that work on employee ownership about the community benefits. One that was studied recently is the benefits for formerly incarcerated employees. So a professor named Robin Cox published a paper this year called The Role of Broad-Based Employee Ownership Opportunities in Prisoner Reentry, and found that the formerly incarcerated workers who were working in ESOP companies had 25% higher annual income, very, very substantial than their peers, other folks who had been incarcerated and were working at firms that were not employee-owned. We know that there are so many barriers for folks who have been directly impacted by the system of mass incarceration in our country as they come out and look for work. One of them is not finding work at all or not finding full-time work. So it was also really meaningful that these workers had 9% more hours each week than non-ESOP employees. And of course, by virtue of being in an employee-owned company, in this case, they were ESOPs, they have higher wealth building potential over time. So this was really exciting data. I think this issue had never been studied before and states a really clear benefit for all of us in society. I want to wrap up by speaking about the broader societal benefits, especially in the context of an economic crisis like the one we're living right now. There is lots of data over many decades, ranging from Mondragon, the largest cooperative complex in the world, which did not lay off a single worker during the Great Recession. They had a large company close, but they moved those workers over to others of the companies in their conglomerate. So extraordinary example in Spain. But this data is actually from the United States, a large study of ESOP companies compared to non-ESOP companies, looking at layoffs in those companies over 4 different years. And the gray bars here are for employees who are not employee owners, just in typical companies. The blue bars are for employee owners in employee-owned companies. And as you can see, the difference is really dramatic. I want to draw your eye to the year 2010, where the layoff rates among employee owners were almost a quarter of the layoffs among the broader population. And in that year, there was another analysis that showed that these layoffs that were not done by employee-owned companies saved the federal government $37 billion. So that is an amazing value proposition for our government to invest in employee ownership, which it does through some tax advantages. But one of our opportunities today is to encourage our government at every level, local government, state, and federal, to do more to advance employee ownership. And the business case is very strong because it actually does save the government money on the other end when the government doesn't have to support folks who lose their jobs. So I'll wrap up with just a few comments of some of the highlights of the end of the paper. Really, the message that you're getting already, I'm sure, from our conversation today is that there couldn't be a better time to accelerate the uptake of employee ownership to create economic resiliency. We need it now more than ever. The opportunities are greater than ever right now. And the paper talks about some of the ways that people in philanthropy and government, some of whom you'll hear from today, are helping to advance and accelerate the uptake of employee ownership. And it ends with kind of a call to action for all of us. There's something everyone can do to promote employee ownership. And some of the recommendations specifically that we have are to get involved in government engagement and policy work to embed employee ownership into our economic recovery. Also, if you don't fit into any of the categories we're specifically addressing today, you can do a lot just by spreading the word. And we encourage you to reach out to Project Equity, to others on the call, or to other organizations involved in this space to find out how you can help. Unlocking capital, both philanthropic and investment dollars, is also key to raise awareness and to reach more businesses. And we also need to accelerate proven methods of transitioning businesses to employee ownership. You'll hear from Bogi Ren in just a minute about how his company transitioned, or what it's been able to do after the transition. There are many great organizations that work on this type of work, and helping us accelerate that during this time will do a lot to help businesses not only survive the current crisis, but also thrive afterwards. And finally, this is a unique moment, and we do need innovation. So we're really encouraging everyone to get involved in finding new ways to incentivize. We're actually working on a business continuity loan fund with incentives for employee ownership, or that would enable companies to set up partial employee ownership if it's not the right time for now, if they just need to get through the crisis, but they have a chance to be strong on the other end. We're finding new ways to help them do that when we get through the crisis. So I want to, thank you for walking with me through some of the data. And now I'm going to invite my friend, Bogi Ren, to join me on the screen. I've had the pleasure of working with Ren for about 4 years. We helped his company, A Slice of New York, transition to become a worker cooperative in 2017. And they've done incredible things since then, including not only surviving, but actually, really innovating and managing to thrive in the midst of this pandemic. So Ren, I want to welcome you and just start off by asking you to share a little bit about how A Slice of New York has fared during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right. Hello, everybody. Pleasure to be with you all today. And, it's been a crazy time for everyone, I would say. but it's a time where we all have to learn to adapt. So even before shelter in place had gone through, uh, my colleagues, Kurt, Joseph, and I all proactively met like a band to make a decision to prepare for a shutdown. So once the shutdown actually hit, the key moves that we made were to stop selling slices, to reconfigure the layouts of our shops, as well as stop dining. The main goal of this was to keep everyone safe. Now, this was a definite hit in our profit and loss statements. And to add to damage, we lost our lunch rush due to shelter in place and had to eliminate items such as salads and tap the beer from our Sunnyvale shop. But what we found was that people were ordering anywhere between 2 to 4 whole pizzas at a time between 4 to 9 o'clock, with at least 4 to 5 lines on hold at the same time, with wait times up to almost 2 hours. So we had to collectively rewire the way both our shops functioned in terms to find a recipe for success and a streamlined process. And one of the coolest things that actually happened was one of our owners, as well as our non-owners, collaborated together and proposed that we should make a personal 10-inch pizza that could be taken out fresh or taken home frozen so that we could minimize that loss between not being able to sling slices out to our actual guests.
Wow, and your name is A Slice of New York, and I think the tagline is New York Pizza in the Bay Area. So I know that slices are a big deal for you guys. So that really shows a significant adjustment and a lot of innovation.
It really does. And, coming back to the profit and loss statement, we were learning a lot through our data analysis. Angela, who's our CFO, and she was collaborating with us to help us take a look at the key performance indicators, KPIs that were generating profits for us. So anywhere between how many pizzas we were actually selling, what kind were they, what should we be prepping on and focusing on in order to have a more streamlined, refined process and to actually prepare for one big, massive dinner rush rather than just waiting for the time to pass by. We had to reallocate all of our hours. What I think, though, was one of the coolest moves we're trying to provide in terms of live data analytics for both shops is to get the key data points that our crew would like to know by simply using an iPad or a tablet in order to understand what is making us profitable. And what we found is when people are seeing what we're losing in profit, they want to find out how we can drive the profit back up by actually seeing, where we actually making the sales at, and where can we compensate.
Wow. Yeah, that's really, I think, one of the greatest promises of employee ownership is that it engages everybody across the company and it makes everyone more successful. Now, speaking of profit, I have to say I love hearing you talk about your P&L and your KPIs and all of that, because part of what organizations like us do is business financial literacy, and it just rolls off your tongue. Tell us about how that's turned out for you today. How are things looking in August for A Slice of New York after going through the pandemic?
It was really rough and grim between March and April. Sales had plummeted down about 20 to 30%, but they slowly picked back up to where they were in February after relocating our cruise schedules and finding the successful hours to capitalize on for a dinner rush. On top of that, too, we were thinking of the well-being of everybody else, and we provided hazard pay after having a very inclusive dialogue with our crew within the first few months of shelter in place. But then we had another dialogue after that to really see if we wanted the profits to go back into our pockets personally, or if people felt that the money should go back into the business. And that dialogue ended up being emotional and heartfelt because everybody wanted the profits to go back into the business because that's what was keeping them afloat.
Wow, it's extraordinary to hear about that kind of win-win, mutually supportive relationship between a company and its workers and its worker owners. I know one incredible example of that is that you and all of your coworkers right now are taking the week off. It's a paid week of vacation for the entire company, and you've shut down operations. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so honestly, after having a big conclusive dialogue again, this dialogue allowed us to be supportive, realistic, adapting, and also acknowledging each other. The fact is, as a board, we decided to give our whole team a paid week off because everybody was physically, mentally, and emotionally drained. And we knew that if we didn't take care of each other, then we wouldn't have a business. We valued our crew way more than the profits, that we'd rather take a calculated hit loss than actually wreck our crew.
Yeah. And you have been a quite profitable company overall. And I know that you and Kirk, your general manager and the original owner of the company, have shared that in 2018 and 2019, your first 2 years after being employee owned, you distributed something like $300,000 each year in profit
Very
sharing.
close. Yeah.
Yeah, which is quite remarkable. You know, a company of 30 some employees, that's really, really meaningful. So we'd just love to recognize that and say that we're all looking forward to the day when you guys will be doing that again. And I'm glad that you know, former strong state has helping you get through this crisis. And Ren, I'd love to end on more of a personal note. So you know, having known you for a few years, I think you've given some great examples in this conversation about how you serve on the board. You're clearly a leader in the company. You've started other efforts on accountability and culture in the company. So I've really seen how employee ownership has given space and platforms for your leadership, which is really inspiring. But I'd love to just end by asking you in your own words, what has being an employee owner meant to you?
Taking a lot of thought into this during such a rough time, I think what it means to me is that becoming an owner has allowed me to have purposeful, adaptive, transformative growth and enrichment, which I'm truly thankful for, because through all these challenges, my team and I can actually collaborate and support each other in all the issues that we're going through in order to build a community that enriches each other for the long run. And that, I feel, is one of the truest and biggest blessings, to be able to work together and not butt heads, and to actually find common ground to help each other succeed.
We all need that right now. Ren, thank you so much for inspiring us and for being part of the conversation today.
Cheers much, and thank you for the time. If you all have questions, feel free to inbox me. I'll be able to answer them.
Terrific, thank you. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to another good friend of Project Equity and of employee ownership. Diane Ives of the Candida Fund has been an incredible champion for employee ownership, and she is going to facilitate our panel discussion. Welcome, Diane.
Thank you so much. That was so fabulous, and it was just wonderful hearing from Ren. And Hillary, thank you for inviting me on board here for today. The Candida Fund has been supporting community wealth building since 2007. But last year, we made 4 significant grants totaling a total of $24 million to 4 organizations that are advancing democratic employee ownership across the United States. The purpose of this was to raise awareness for alternative models of community wealth building in America, while empowering thousands of workers who have traditionally lacked economic security. The focus is on transitioning existing small and medium-sized businesses to democratic employee ownership, to stem the tide of business closures and give employees a chance at ownership, as Ren so perfectly demonstrated. Our partners for our grant making are Project Equity, the Fund for Employee Ownership at Evergreen, the ICA Group, and Nexus Community Partners. The focus among our grantees is on this concept of socializing democratic employee ownership, which is part of what we're talking about today, as well as building the pipelines of potential businesses, funders, and investors. So I have 3 fabulous panelists here today, colleagues and friends that I'm happy to introduce. Jean Wardford is a program officer for family economic security at the W.K. Kellogg Foundation. She spearheads Kellogg's field building investments in employee ownership, including research, awareness raising, and technical support for small businesses that are transitioning into powerful employee-owned companies. Christina Correa is a vice president at Citi Community Investing and Development. She's a member of the Asset Funders Network and leads Citi's investments in employee ownership as a tool for supporting small businesses and narrowing the racial wealth gap. And Jordan Klein is the interim director of the City of Berkeley's Department of Planning and Development. In his prior role as Berkeley's economic development manager, he led the city's groundbreaking program to preserve small businesses and build community wealth through employee ownership. So welcome to all of you. I have a few questions for you, and next to no time to have you answer them all. So I know you're going to be smart and fast with all of these. So the first question I just kind of want to put out to all of you is a little bit about the journey. So what led you to make employee ownership a priority and invest in it as a strategy? And also, how is it relevant now in light of COVID-19 and the movement for Black lives? And Jean, maybe I'll start with you.
Thanks so much, Diane. It's always great to see you and be on a panel with you, and have, as well as Tina, and now meeting Jordan. The work is so important, and all of you really have been leaders in this work, and so it has been really a great opportunity for us to really collaborate and join together and leverage this work. Employee ownership really has provided an opportunity for businesses to leave legacies in communities, but also to save jobs. And at the foundation, our real interest in pursuing employee ownership was directly tied to workers with families, and particularly those families that have small children. How do we close the racial wealth gap for those families? And so we have been looking at different ways and different strategies. And, you know, if we listen to the information that Hillary shared with us earlier, this is right on target. You see employees with higher wages, living wages, short-term wealth, as well as long-term wealth through IRA and 401k programs. And so I think that this is just really, you know, while it's not a novel idea, they've been doing it in other parts of the world for years. That this is something that really momentum is starting to take off for employee ownership. How do we support those businesses who are actually hiring people who live in communities? How do we support the transfer of wealth to those employees? They see those jobs, the real estate is staying in the community. And so, you know, I think it's really important. And I think that while we have always been focused on racial equity, that this even has lifted this work up and made it more visible and that much more critical to what's going on in communities right now, particularly with Black Lives Matter, because this is really giving individuals an opportunity to say, how do we move the needle for poor people, for Black people, for brown people? And so we really are, while we're excited that we have this opportunity, we also know that it's a challenge and it's a lot of hard work ahead of us. But I think people really are positioning themselves, and particularly those people in communities, to become more empowered. So employee ownership for us is just one of the keys, I think, to unlocking that wealth.
Thank you so much. That was great. I appreciate it. Jordan, you want to take the same question?
Sure. Thanks, Diane, and thanks to my fellow panelists, and thanks to Project Equity for inviting me to participate in this today. It was really a perfect storm of a bunch of different factors that led to the City of Berkeley investing in worker ownership. We had Project Equity and also Sustainable Economies Law Center, which is an Oakland-based economic justice organization, leading grassroots efforts to educate policymakers and community members about the value of worker ownership. That was such a crucial element, and that, I think, led to another important factor, which was political leadership. We had then council member, now mayor of Berkeley, Jesse Adaguin, has been a very passionate and very effective and vocal leader for an advocate for worker ownership. Really important for a municipality like ours to have that kind of political leadership. And then we also had real alignment with our economic development goals around small business retention and equitable economic development. Small businesses in Berkeley, like many urban areas around the country, have really been struggling over the last couple of years with being squeezed on both ends. They've got increasing operating costs, and they're increasing competition, especially from the internet for retailers, and other really existential threats that are threatening legacy and longtime businesses to go out of business. And as an economic development agency, it was our job to come up with strategies to help them keep their doors open. We partnered in 2016 with the Bay Area Organization of Black-Owned Businesses to survey and outreach to Black-owned businesses in Berkeley to learn about what are the factors impacting them, what kind of support did they want to see from the city of Berkeley. And one of the things we heard was we need help with succession planning. We have business owners who are aging out. We need help figuring out what to do. So when we conducted a request for proposals to recruit economic development partners to help us come up with small business retention strategies, and then Project Equity applied, it was like a match made in heaven. It was all kind of lined up and came together. For the second part of your question, Diane, I mean, obviously, I think this is more relevant than ever in the era of COVID. You heard from Hillary about all the evidence that shows that worker-owned co-ops are more resilient and more able to withstand crises. And amidst this incredible movement for Black lives, as we see so many people in the country kind of awakening to the reality of white oppression in so many facets of our society, and especially, as Jean talked about, disparities in income and wealth. You know, amidst that, so I've spent my 20-year career in planning and community development here in the Bay Area, which is, of course, a bastion of progressive values, but we've got those disparities here as well. And as a planner, my whole career, I've been asking myself, why does economic growth and neighborhood improvement always seem to have to come along with gentrification and displacement as well? How do we pursue economic development that reduces disparities in wealth and income for Black and Latino people and their families? We've got, in the Bay Area, we've got all the policies, all these progressive policies like inclusionary zoning and these robust workforce development system and career pathways. We got community benefits agreements, and yet still we have these disparities. And worker ownership, as I've learned about this strategy and as we've started this work, I've been so excited about it because I see it as a strategy that doesn't necessarily require a huge financial commitment from governments, but it has the potential to produce really huge results. So I do, again, more relevant than ever now.
Yeah. Jordan, thank you so much for that. That was so helpful. And I just want to commend the city of Berkeley for being such a leader in this and digging deep and not looking for the silver bullet, which they're not going to find. So thank you for that. Tina? What's your journey?
Thanks so much, and appreciate it. I just want to reiterate everyone's thanks to Project Equity, Hillary and Annalisa and the team. Thanks, Rendell, for your amazing account of your experience. And Diane, Jean, and Jordan, just always a pleasure to be with you. And so much of what you already said resonates. I know time is short, so I'll just pick up where we were. And, you know, I think in this moment, we're really proud at City that we've been investing in economic empowerment and ownership in the Black community for years, and alongside many of you, especially Eugene. In the last 5 years, we've been even more intentional and targeted in these partnerships. We know that the racial wealth gap exists and is widening. It can't be ignored that in the last several months have underscored that these communities cannot be ignored and are disproportionately impacted and struggle to gain equitable access to capital financing and other opportunities within this realm. So we're fortunate to have long-standing core collaboration examples in addition, including the Asset Building Policy Network, which was formed in 2008, and chiefly utilizes a racial lens to inform programs and public policies, especially those which impact low-income communities of color, focus on the racial wealth gap, and as you were mentioning, Jordan, focus on anti-displacement of small businesses as well. So as another example, you know, we've expanded our portfolio around 6 years ago to really include organizations that were unapologetic in talking about race, including the Democracy at Work Institute, which Hillary mentioned, and it's specifically at DOWI, it's Legacy Business Investment Fund, which preserves longstanding or legacy small businesses, especially Black-owned businesses who were in danger of closing. And together we worked with Dowie, the Legacy Business Fund, and the National Urban League, along with its entrepreneurship centers. We focused on a strategy that would combat closures and address the racial wealth loss that you all at Project Equity, along with Dowie, Democracy Collaborative, and others, helped develop a few years ago to model some of this work out. So again, so grateful for that contribution to the field and to be a part of it. So just lastly, I think, acknowledging what has been said, Black businesses make up a really significant and material portion of owners nationally, play a huge role in our economy, as we all know, but the values of those businesses comparatively are often low. This is in no small part due to historical patterns of owners being shut out of capital markets and not receiving equal access. So I think with employee ownership in particular, there's an opportunity for white owners who, instead of concentrating wealth in their family or in private sector investors, might sell the businesses to their employees, many of whom may be of color and already run and know the business in every aspect and are contributing tremendous gains every day. So these types of ownership conversions can further economic power among Black owned or operated businesses, and we think they hold tremendous promise. In this moment right now, with the closure rates being as high as they are, I think 41% of Black owned firms have seen closures according to the National Bureau of Economic Research that came out. So it's really certainly a moment to be having this conversation, and again, appreciate being a part of it.
Thank you so much. That was great. And the way you said that, it's a moment to be having this conversation. I want to acknowledge that all of you are so conversant in this language and talking about it. But one of the challenges that we have is that we need to socialize this idea more broadly. And so I'm curious if you've had any pushback on the strategy or how you approached talking about this work in a way that brought along your colleagues and perhaps some of your detractors. Jordan, you want to start?
Yes, absolutely. Because the pushback is there. I mean, from the municipal perspective, we've got businesses who might be skeptical about seeing their city investing in worker ownership just because they don't, I don't want to sell my business. And so we have been really careful and thoughtful about how we communicate to our business community about this. And I want to thank Project Equity for their patience and partnership in that work. We sent a letter out to business owners around Berkeley of a certain age, and I think we went through like 6 drafts of that letter going back and forth just to make sure that we're choosing the right language that shows the businesses that we value them, acknowledging that work ownership might not be the right solution for everyone, but at the same time while trying to get the value and opportunity across to them. There's also, I think, skepticism that just comes from a lack of familiarity and lack of knowledge about work ownership. We talk sometimes about the myths of worker ownership, and SELC, Sustainable Economies Law Center, has been a great partner about this. Like these myths, like, oh, every decision you make has to be through consensus, and there are no managers allowed in worker cooperatives. And so these myths are out there, and so we take time to educate people in our community about that, and that goes a long way. That we've really incorporated that into our initiative in Berkeley with partnership with Project Equity and SELC. We put together a workshop where we educated staff, not just in the city of Berkeley, but we invited staff from around the region, economic development and planning staff from around the region to come participate, and staff in our finance department to really educate people about what like the realities of worker cooperatives. And Project Equity put together great materials customized for the Berkeley context that we can use. Every new economic development employee that we hire is going to have access to these training materials. So they're going to, in their first week on the job, they're going to learn about worker co-ops.
That's great. Thank you so much. Tina, how about you? I mean, you're coming from a big company, right? I'm curious, like what pushback you might have seen or how you went about socializing this.
Yeah, a great question. Thanks, Diane. I mean, I think strategically we didn't want to go it alone, and we didn't need to. Luckily, the need is so much bigger than us. So we really collaborated and cohesively developed these cross-functional, cross-sectoral strategies, really, with Cerna, Ford, and Kellogg Foundations to be thought partners with us. We're also, grateful to the Candida Fund for putting your stake in the ground. So thank you, Diane, and especially to Eugene, who's been alongside us the entire time, coming up with the approach and really working across the funding community to put our ideas in motion and catalyze new efforts. So I think it's more powerful to think and invest really as this kind of a collective than on our own. And we wanted to model the types of employee ownership investments that can accelerate what has already been done, and really also to push that conversation on both race as well as gender, and even think about intersectional ownership in certain industries, like within childcare and certain other care industries specifically, all within the context of employee ownership. So, you know, I mean, I wouldn't say we had pushback internally. I think instead we did really recognize that we had a unique role, right? We had to consider as a financial institution what was our sort of purpose here and potential value add, since we didn't actually finance the conversions. But what we did do was we held convenings with our nonprofit and CDFI partners around how to finance deals specifically, you know, requiring more complex arrangements or sort of know-how and transactional assistance that bankers, CDFIs, and other financiers could get more familiar if they weren't already. And our colleagues took our calls internally, and one of the really interesting things that we did was explore which businesses in our group could take advantage of some of these services. So we worked with our M&A lawyers to lead pro bono engagements with our nonprofit partners on fund structuring, on how to position employee ownership and provide that legal framework and advice, so that the Black businesses who were working, Black-owned businesses who were working with the fund would essentially have the benefits of the same tax credit that perhaps their white-owned firm counterparts may have had in the past, or may have been familiar with through their advisors. We wanted to make sure that everyone had access to that knowledge and that expertise. So again, we engaged our business to lean in with us and to bring the full weight of our expertise and resources and relationships, not just write a check from the philanthropy side, but essentially try to bring all the resources to bear and collaborate among many players, because we all have a hand in this. And I think a lot of the funders come at it from a different angle. There's so many lenses to this work, and it's so robust and touches so many areas of policy and of all of our lives, including the employee owners' lives. So I just think that it has been incredibly helpful to have that collective and shared sort of view on how to promote this work.
Thank you so much. I love this notion of, like addressing the why with the how. I mean, I think that's really important, that it's not just like, yes, we should be able to do this. It's like, no, here's how we have to do it. I think that's great. So we just have a little bit of time left, and I'm going to try and squeeze in 2 more questions for y'all. And one is just real quickly, what successes you're seeing in the field thus far. I mean, I know it's still early, but I'm just curious if you could, like, real quickly just give us an example. So Jordan, successes in Berkeley?
Yeah, many layers of successes from our partnership with Project Equity. The education piece I talked about already. The data analysis, Project Equity helped us look at the data about our business population. We gleaned a lot of knowledge and information about that. There's the outreach to our business community. I think there's a huge value in a municipal organization reaching out to their businesses. We've reached out to 1,000 businesses through our partnership with Project Equity. Again, while worker ownership isn't necessarily the right solution for every business, I think just the value of the businesses hearing from the city that we care about them, we're thinking about them, this service is available to them. That's an outcome, and it's important. And then of course there's the actual the outcomes with the businesses we are working with. We've had, I think, a couple of dozen businesses indicate that they're interested and have engaged in consultations with us around what it would mean to transition. We've had a handful of businesses move forward with the feasibility analysis that the city of Berkeley has helped to subsidize. So analyzing what it would mean to transition to worker ownership. And we've had one business complete the transition to worker ownership in Berkeley. And of course, the outcome for those businesses, all of their employees, it's really robust and exciting.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that. Jean, how about you? Successes? Have we lost Jean?
I think we may be having some technical difficulties.
Okay, I'm gonna just keep us moving, and if Jean comes back, we'll ask her about that. But of course, in the nanosecond of time that we have left, the biggest question of all is, like, where do we go from here and how do we scale? Jordan, you want to take that one, and then we'll get Tina, and then hopefully we'll get Jean back.
Sure. I mean, real quick, I think there's room for growth, via both top-down and bottom-up approaches. I think that you know, I would love to see the federal and state governments around the country doing more to incentivize, you know, support worker cooperatives through incentives. And I think Hillary talked about this earlier. I think there's a real strong case for that, and also redirect existing resources towards economic development towards the worker cooperative model. I think we're seeing such great results from this model that it makes sense to do more investment. And then from the bottom up, you know, the Berkeley example, you know, educating policymakers, doing the storytelling when people hear the stories about from worker owners, like Ren told his incredible, compelling story. That storytelling is so valuable. And when you do that, I think municipalities around the country will want to make the investment to build a program locally.
Thank you so much for that. And just Tina, before you say anything, I just want to remind people, if you have questions, put them in the chat, because we're going to switch to Q&A really soon. But kind of where do you see scaling opportunities in the work?
Great, thanks. And thanks, Jordan, for that context around the municipal work, because I think that is an area where we really see a burgeoning interest and capacity. We were fortunate to work with the National League of Cities and DOWI around a program called the Shared Equity and Economic Development Fellowship. So, you know, you covered it. I don't need to go into depth, but I think just bringing the full capability and scale from the municipal lens is a huge asset that's burgeoning around the area. I think first, you know, we should do more to save existing Black-owned businesses that are ripe for employee ownership conversions now. We should step in to do everything and anything we can to prevent closures and convert them as soon as possible, and really make those tools to do so more scalable, more nimble, and tactically speaking, I'll say what I mean by that. I think accelerating the transition and the transition timeline, taking conversion projects in the pipeline and really helping to finalize and convert them to deal flow, to pair with lenders, to pair with TA providers and others is really critical. And a few of our nonprofit partners, especially Project Equity and the Working World, who is also a CDFI institution, among others, have done this effectively through use of not only technology and you know, tools like, you know, standardized mechanisms to look at company value, to understand the context of decision making in terms of data around their business and how it relates to others in the industry, et cetera. And pairing that information and those tools with direct hands-on assistance to selling owners and acquiring employee owners is really powerful. And I think we just need to get, you know, sort of quicker models for how to do all of those things that are inherently time intensive and can be complex, but there are ways that a lot of this can be rolled up, I think, and done in a more holistic way that also recognizes the unique business, you know, concerns and needs that every company will have. Third, I think expanded analysis and mapping of the businesses that would be a good fit for transitions and conversions. So the field has advanced. I think we've moved away from the conversation about employee ownership awareness building. While of course, not everyone will know about every option when selling or thinking about retiring or selling their business. You know, I think we really now are at the point of more so honing and building that business case on an individual level. And yet there's still more to be done about getting granular, and specific businesses will have their own process and procedure around that. But we're getting there. So I think that's really exciting. And then lastly, from a donor perspective, helping new entrants to the field, you know, among investors and others who want to be involved in these transactions and projects, as Hillary mentioned earlier, to understand the landscape of players. You know, who are the TA providers? How do they work together? Who's really invested in aggregating capital structures? And what are some of these new models that even in the last 2 or 3 years, you know, Diane, you've done so much in this regard, and the Federal Home Loan Bank and others that work with you all to really make different types of capital available and to make it kind of cohesive and nimble and fit together for a project structure and what the needs might be. So how does this connect to a broader agenda that may align with other funders' priority areas? You know, some may be interested in employee ownership as a tool to promote quality jobs. Well, you know, Hillary made the case very clear. You know, this really has an income boosting effect as well as an asset and wealth building effect. So how do we do that? But at the same time, some funders may be more interested in the business case and directly investing in those companies. So I think there's an opportunity to open the tent for greater participation among more interested donors and capital providers, and that you know, the next stage is going to be a really exciting one, taking what we've learned and scaling that up in a major way.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. And Jean, your timing is perfect. You're back to give your elevator pitch on how we can scale. What comes next for us?
I'm really sorry about technology. You know, when it works, it's wonderful, right? Maybe my laptop is all zoomed out. But I think that there are a couple of ways that we really can begin to scale. And I don't know if you already covered those. And so please, you know, forgive the redundancy if you have, about how we can work with not only local and state municipalities to understand what the economic advantage is to their state if they really begin to invest and support transitions to employee ownership. As well as I think there's a big role for the SBA to play in terms of, you know, with the Main Street Act that passed. I think it's been almost 2 years now. And we have not seen that really implemented. And I think that that's also another way for us to begin to build in some capacity and some momentum nationwide if we can get those entities really involved in this movement. Because what we know is that it's not going to survive on just the backs of philanthropy. We need you know, municipalities and government to become partners. And this is not a this is an opportunity for them to reap some economic benefits as well, with businesses staying in their community, them being able to keep jobs there. It can help them toward their economic development goals, in addition to their tax base. So there are a lot of benefits for doing this. This is not a program where we're asking for, you know, handouts. We're saying that if you support this work, it will benefit not only the states and the cities, but it will benefit the people who live there as well.
Thank you so much. That was great. You really kind of took it to scale in a very short period of time. I love that. Thank you so much. Annalisa, I think we're going to turn it back to you in case there's any questions from the audience. Thank you all. Stay on. Don't turn your cameras off.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So we don't have a lot of time for questions, but one came up about what policy recommendation, if you could make a policy recommendation to Congress to support this work, what would it be? So I invite any of you to chime in on that question.
I can just throw out a response to that, and it'll address one of the other questions that came in. So several months ago, Project Equity was talking to some national policy organizations about ideas that we thought would foster employee ownership as part of the pandemic survival and recovery. And one of those was very similar to the Temporary Employee Ownership Act that was introduced by Senator Johnson recently, which involves providing grant funds from the federal government to facilitate the establishment of ESOPs. We would want to see it applied to worker cooperatives as well. But I think the Paycheck Protection Program made a really good case that the government and society can have an interest in actually subsidizing in a short-term way something that does create benefits in the long term. So I think it's worth all of us checking out that new act and considering supporting it. At the state level, I do think that awareness raising and the federal government can support this as well, as Jean said, through the Main Street Employee Ownership Act. So getting the word out, because the infrastructure is there to support these transitions. So getting the word out is really critical. And funding, for example, state employee ownership centers or similar programs that raise awareness. And also it's pretty widely embraced by the field, the notion that one of the key things for uptake of employee ownership is tax incentives for selling business owners. And those exist at the federal level. Those could be improved, I think, to be more accessible to more businesses and smaller businesses, including worker cooperatives. And they could also be put into place in more powerful ways at the state level. So that's another thing I think we should all be considering.
Great, thank you. Anybody else want to weigh in on that one? If not, I have another question I can throw out there.
You know, one thing that we've talked about, Berkeley, haven't sealed the deal and gotten across the finish line yet is is a purchasing preference. So when we go out for bid on any kind of service, give a preference. We have an existing preference, I think, for women and minority-owned business, extending that same preference. So it's like a bonus points for worker-owned cooperatives, and I think instituting that at the federal level would be a powerful thing.
Thank you. A question came in asking if business owners always lose money when they sell to their employees as opposed to selling to another individual or company. Who wants to answer that one?
It's a short answer. The answer is no. They definitely do not always lose money. And sometimes they can even do better. But our general educational information that we share with business owners and people who interact with business owners is that owners generally can get a fair value, a fair price that would be pretty competitive with other purchase offers, with the exception of maybe a strategic buyer or someone who just wanted to buy it at something above market price for their own reasons. And we all know that private equity firms, for example, are potentially really going to take advantage of the current crisis to buy companies in ways that will further consolidate wealth. And we believe that there are opportunities potentially to work with private equity firms to mitigate some of that impact, and more importantly, to outside of that landscape to be getting businesses, buying businesses for prices that are fair, perfectly fair to that owner, and often very competitive with other offers.
Thank you so much, Hillary. So we only have a couple minutes left. I'm going to share a few concluding thoughts, and then we do have a couple minutes to stay on to address some additional questions. So if folks want to hang on for that, you're very welcome to. I just want to thank Jean and Jordan and Tina and Diane and Bren for joining us today and contributing your thoughts and experience and expertise to the conversation. So we're in a moment where crisis has created opportunity to do things differently. We know that we have to address the problems of working poverty and wage and wealth consolidation that has created so much wage and income inequality in the country. We have to think big and outside of the box to solve these problems. And here we have a new idea that really isn't new at all. It's been proven and it's tested. It's just not very well known or understood, and you don't find that every day. But what employee ownership offers us is a way to structurally embed equity and resiliency into the workplace, into small businesses, and thereby embed equity and resiliency into the broader economy that small businesses fuel. So we know that small businesses employ about 50% of the workforce in America, and we know the small businesses of today become the big businesses of tomorrow. So how do we move employee ownership from a best kept secret to the new business as usual? And how do we take this moment of this twin small business closure crises of the silver tsunami of retiring baby boomers and COVID-19 and turn it into an opportunity to build worker wealth for the next generation of workers and workers of color and low-income workers? And so we need you to help us do that. We need you to join this movement. We need you to continue this learning journey that you've been in on employee ownership, that you've joined in with us today. We encourage you to read the white paper and share it with as many people as possible, and also to please consider how your organization can join us in this movement to help us scale employee ownership. So thank you so much for taking time to be with us today and to learn more. I encourage you to connect with Project Equity, with our speakers, and with our peers in the movement, many of whom are mentioned in the white paper, which is attached as a handout to this webinar and also available on Project Equity's website. So thank you so much. And for those who want to stay on, and if any of the speakers have a moment to stay on, I'll probably just throw out one or two more questions for us to address.